Last night, like something out of a movie, video emerged of people frantically burning something in the courtyard of a building. As it turns out, this was the Chinese Consulate in Houston frantically burning documents. People noticed the smoke, called the fire department who came in. And as it turns out, the United States has ordered the closure of the Chinese Consulate amid an ongoing spying scandal where hackers have been accused of stealing COVID vaccine research at the behest of China. So apparently, after they got word they had to shut down the consulate, they went to the courtyard and frantically destroyed these documents. I swear it's like something out of a movie, man. But the escalation of tensions between the US and China are getting pretty fierce. Now, Trump has been tough on China for quite some time. Earlier this year, we saw China moving a strike group through the South China Sea between Taiwan. This got a lot of people angry. China's been trying to assert control in this area for a very long time, infringing on the territorial waters of other countries, even sinking Vietnamese fishing boats. In response, the U.S. has sent in destroyers and sent aircraft carriers to the region. Suffice it to say, we are dangerously close to a war with China. But now we have a GOP senator arguing that we need to fundamentally rethink our relationship because tensions are getting hot. We've already seen tons of articles going back years warning us about something called Thucydides' trap, which basically is saying that as China grows in power, the likelihood of war with the U.S. becomes almost entirely, well, closer to 1. Like it's actually going to happen. Many people want to avert this, but we're now entering what some describe as a Cold War. Well, some argue that the Cold War started a long time ago. Others argue it's beginning just now. Some are very pessimistic about it, and others are still rather pessimistic, but less so. But amid all of this, there are questions about who's handling things properly. Of course, media propaganda seems to have emerged like clockwork perfectly right around the time the closure was announced. Stories are blaming Trump, saying he's doing a terrible job. And it's probably just because it's an opportunity for the media to once again say Orange Man bad. Or maybe it's because there are a lot of powerful interests who have financial ties to China and are worried about what it really means as this escalation and tit for tat continues. Let's get started and read about exactly what's going on with China and why they were torching these documents, as you can see on the screen. The first story from CNN. U.S. orders closure of Chinese consulate in Houston. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are many ways you can give, but the best thing you can do is seriously just subscribe to this channel. I assumed most people would, but surprisingly, around half or so people don't subscribe to my channel, even though they do consistently watch. So if you really want to make sure YouTube is sending you my videos when they come out, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit that notification bell. Let's read the news. CNN reports, the United States government has abruptly ordered China to cease all operations and events at its consulate in Houston, Texas, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, in what it called an unprecedented escalation in recent actions taken by Washington. U.S. State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus said the consulate was directed to close, quote, in order to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information, but did not immediately provide additional details of what prompted the closure. Now, I'm going to stop right here and just say it appears to be that they believe China was trying to steal COVID research. Relations between China and the U.S. have plummeted in the past year amid an ongoing trade war, the coronavirus pandemic, and U.S. criticism of China's human rights abuses in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. A spokesperson for the State Department said in a separate statement that China has engaged for years in massive illegal spying and influence operations, and that those activities have increased markedly in scale and scope over the past few years. Late Tuesday evening, police in Houston said they responded to reports of smoke in the courtyard outside the consulate, located on Montrose Boulevard in the city's Midtown area. Local media shared a video of what happened to be officials inside the compound burning documents. What could they possibly be burning? I'm sure a lot of it's nonsense, but hey, loose lips sink ships, they say, right? China knows full well any bit of information from inside that building seized by the U.S. will be used against them, so they just lighten it all up. In a statement posted on its official social media, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said the order to close the consulate was, quote, a political provocation unilaterally launched by the U.S. side, which seriously violates international law, basic norms governing international relations, and the bilateral consular agreement between China and the U.S. The Chinese Foreign Ministry condemned the decision and urged the U.S. to withdraw it. The statement goes on to say that the U.S. has been, quote, shifting the blame to China with stigmatization and unwarranted attacks against China's social system, harassing Chinese diplomatic and consular staff in the U.S., intimidating and interrogating Chinese students, and confiscating their personal electrical devices, even detaining them without cause. It added, China is committed to the principle of non-interference. Infiltration and interference is never in the genes and tradition of China's foreign policy. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is currently in Europe, where he has been rallying leaders on the continent to take a harder line with Beijing and meeting with exiled dissidents. Pompeo declined to offer further details about the ordered closure when asked Wednesday. Now, this escalation isn't just about the spying of COVID research. It has a lot to do with Hong Kong. Trump recently signed an executive order granting substantial powers to, I believe, essentially to seize the property of individuals, anyone, even Americans, seen to be engaged in activities that would suppress the rights of those in Hong Kong. I'm trying to be very careful because it was an extensive executive order. I'm not a lawyer, but it really does sound like Trump and the Department of Justice they're not playing games anymore. Bill Barr called out Hollywood and big tech for cozying up to China, saying you better watch yourself. Otherwise, you're going to have to register as foreign agents if you keep giving in to what China wants. Making note that in the U.S., for instance, the iPhone, the FBI or the DOJ, they don't have a backdoor access to the iPhone. And perhaps it's a good thing. I mean, we have our civil rights here. We have the Fourth Amendment. But in China, Bill Barr notes, do you think they'd be able to sell the iPhone in China without giving China access? They're an authoritarian government. Yeah, I don't think so. If that's the case, then these big tech companies are giving them serious powers. CNN says, according to a statement on its website, the Houston Consulate covers 8 southern U.S. states, including Texas and Florida, as well as Puerto Rico. It was the first consulate to be established in 1979 after the U.S. and China established diplomatic relations, though a liaison office was currently operating in Washington, D.C. at the time. On Tuesday, U.S. prosecutors charged 2 alleged Chinese hackers over, quote, sweeping global computer intrusion program that they say was supported by the country's government and aimed at coronavirus treatment and vaccine research. The indictment also marks the first time that the U.S. has accused the hackers of working on behalf of the Chinese government. So as we can see here in these posts from local news, the fire department came out, put a ladder up over the building. I guess here's what they say. Houston Fire and police are responding to reports of documents being burned at the Consulate General of China. They mention the address. Here's what the scene looks like right now. Things are getting spicy, man. China's vowing to retaliate after U.S. orders closure of its consulate in Houston. They say Beijing immediately vowed to retaliate for the unprecedented escalation, leading to speculation it could order the closure of the U.S. consulate in Wuhan. In Wuhan, of all places, huh? Very interesting. Which has been shuttered since the novel coronavirus epidemic spread across the city in January. I mean, it's already shut down for obvious reasons. But man, I'll tell you what. The thing you got to understand about war and conflict is it's kind of like a cockroach. You see one on the wall, there's 1,000 hiding behind it. What that means in relation to this, when you see Chinese officials rushing to burn documents, I'm fairly certain we are not getting the full-scale story of what's really going on. Now, again, people have said we're in a Cold War, and we're dangerously close to a hot war. They say analysts on both sides say that bilateral relations are at their worst since before 1979, when the United States formally recognized the People's Republic of China. At this rate, I wouldn't even be surprised if Trump decides to sever diplomatic relations with China someday, said Chu Shulong, a professor in American politics and diplomacy in Tsinghua University, suggesting that this was part of President Trump's re-election strategy. Well, I'll stop you right there. GOP senator warns of China century, reveals plan to unravel U.S.-Beijing ties. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn has released a new white paper calling on Washington, D.C. to broadly reshape its relationship with the Chinese Communist Party amid the coronavirus crisis, warning that failure to do so may allow Beijing to set the global narrative and encourage authoritarianism worldwide. Hear, hear. I agree, man. Listen, I've talked about this quite a bit, the NBA's custom jerseys, where you could write any message you want on the back of a jersey, any name, except for slurs and free Hong Kong. The NBA said this was but a humble glitch and we will fix it. And then ultimately decided to remove the entire thing altogether. You're not going to be seeing these high-profile NBA businesses and corporations saying free Hong Kong anytime soon. Why? They're starting to make a lot of money in China. So we've even seen high-profile individuals with the NBA, most of you know the story, refuse to call out the human rights abuses. This is where things get scary. If we don't stand up now and call them out, our corporations and our social norms will be overrun by Chinese authoritarianism, the Chinese Communist Party. Blackburn, a prominent critic of China critic, who has long lobbied for closer scrutiny of U.S. ties with Beijing, published her white paper Wednesday against a backdrop of deteriorating Washington-Beijing relations and the closing of the Chinese consulate in Houston. In her paper, Blackburn describes 2020 as a momentous year in U.S.-China relations, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, a raft of trade tensions, territorial disputes, and human rights issues. Though these issues are pushing lawmakers and voters towards more China-skeptic sentiment, Blackburn told Newsweek Tuesday that her paper offers detail on how to translate that into policy. It sounds simple to say, well, let's cut off the interaction here, or let's stop doing trade with them, but it's not that simple. It is truly an unraveling, and this unraveling is going to take us several years, and you have to have a blueprint from which to start. So that has been the purpose of the white paper. What you have to begin to do is look at how China is pressing to make the 21st century that China century, Blackburn continued. We have this story. It goes well beyond just the China century, Blackburn. They say it's Donald Trump's election strategy, but we have this story here. China may retaliate against Nokia, Ericsson, if EU bans Huawei, from the Wall Street Journal. Yes, a lot of things have been going on, man. I believe the UK may have banned Huawei. I'm not entirely sure, but the concerns are that they want to install cellular infrastructure and they could use it to spy. There was a big scandal not that long ago where conspiracy theories were spreading that if you bought, say, a toaster from China, it could in fact have a hidden Wi-Fi or Bluetooth signal stealing your information, surreptitiously connecting to the internet and sending that to China. In response, apparently, I believe it was the armed forces banned goods that were made in China. Now, I don't know about all that. It's a big conspiracy. A lot of people were concerned. But I think one of the big issues for now is, look, if you believe in America and you want to help the economy, you should probably buy American. Because when these companies send these manufacturing jobs over to China, those dollars, that revenue goes to the Chinese government, the Communist Party and workers. And though we can support the workers for sure, they're not living in good conditions, to say the least. And don't get me started on Hong Kong. China vows to retaliate after Trump ends special economic status. I mean, it was well beyond just ending special economic status. Trump's executive order was bold. It sounded like they were saying they'd take your stuff if you work with China in any way. Look, right now, China is suppressing the rights of the people of Hong Kong. The executive order could suspend their ability to trade in the U.S. Basically, everyone in China. This freaked them out. So they vowed retaliation. So let's try it again. They vow retaliation for Hong Kong. They vow retaliation over Huawei. They're vowing retaliation of the closure of the consulate. Suffice it to say, tensions are getting hot. Now, I want to go back. I want to go back to that first story that mentioned that Mike Pompeo is in Europe trying to rally support from our allies to be harder on Beijing. Don't forget it, because now it's time to play politics. Amid the story of the consulate, we all of a sudden see these stories try claiming this is all about Donald Trump's re-election. Trump accelerates China's punishments in time for re-election. The president is starting to punish China on everything, including issues that have long-standing points of friction, that have been long-standing points of friction, but that Trump often avoided. Could it be that Trump wants to make sure he puts these motions in place in the event he loses an election and he wants to get it done? Perhaps. Could it be that Trump is trying to say, look, I'm tough on China, a vote for me? Yeah, maybe that's fair as well. But I got to point out that the propaganda is thick. I bring you now to this story from Vox. This story came out last month. Donald Trump is vulnerable on China, so is Joe Biden. They say China is poised to be the key foreign policy issue during the 2020 election. And the fight over which party and which candidate can best handle the country is in full swing. To President Donald Trump, it's a matter of who's tougher. On that metric, he, of course, believes he has the upper hand. He launched a trade war against China, has sharply criticized Beijing for reacting slowly to COVID, and can say he prioritized U.S.-China relations far more than his predecessors. Former Vice President Joe Biden, meanwhile, argues Trump has been nothing more than tough talk, weak action on China, according to one of his top advisors. Namely, he'll point to how the trade war hasn't yet bolstered the American economy, as Trump promised, and how Trump has cozied up to Chinese President Xi Jinping. However, Biden isn't really saying how he'll be much better than Trump, just that he would be. One thing is clear, though. Biden would aim to rally American allies to push back on Beijing, whereas Trump has preferred the U.S. handle the problem alone. What? Well, you spoke too soon, Vox, because as we now learned, just within the month, Mike Pompeo is certainly trying to rally support from our allies. So if that's the only criticism you have, I'm sorry, you have nothing to stand on. Joe Biden absolutely, at least in my opinion, would be very soft on China. You see, Barack Obama's take on the whole China thing. How do we stop the erosion of our manufacturing base, our working class, and the encroachment of Chinese authoritarianism? I know. Free trade, says Barack Obama, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That would make our economic ties connected so they wouldn't necessarily overtake us. Oh, spare me. We were seeing factories and jobs move over to China like crazy. How does it make sense? Listen, I've known this for a long time as a skateboarder. How does it make sense they cut down a tree in Canada, send that tree to China for processing to become a skateboard, send it to California to be put in a warehouse, and then distributed across the U.S.? That to me seemed absurd, especially if you're an environmentalist concerned about carbon emissions. Well, the issue was Chinese labor was just so cheap. It was easier to actually send Canadian rock maple to China for processing and back to the U.S. To me, that seems nonsensical. Maybe there's something I'm missing about all this, but I don't see how that free trade agreement was going to be good for us. In fact, many leftists also agreed it was a bad idea. Why should I now be convinced that Joe Biden, who was the vice president at the time, is going to be tough on China? No, I'm sorry. I think he'll be more than soft. I think he'll be the opposite. I think he'll be buddy-buddy with China. That's my big concern. China is engaging in serious, horrific atrocities, and I am not confident Biden will do anything about it. You know why? The atrocities were going on while Obama was in office, so no thank you. I'm not here to claim that Donald Trump is better, or better than, or I should say the best, like he's perfect. But to clarify, no, he's definitely better than Biden. The best, you have an argument, even good. You want to have an argument, fine, but better than Biden, you better believe it. They go on to mention that last week, the Democratic National Committee launched a 30-second ad in swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, blasting Trump's trade war. Trump said he'd get tough on China. He didn't get tough. He got played. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to this criticism where they say Joe Biden would criticize Trump for, the fact that the trade war hasn't bolstered the American economy as Trump promised. I mean, what? It literally did. What do you mean? We had 3 years of the best economy we'd ever seen. Jim Cramer of CNBC, the best numbers of our lives, he said. Now, okay, maybe that wasn't the trade war. Maybe that was in spite of the trade war. So what? That's still Trump being tough on China. That's it. Well, Trump countered this with his own ad, where he basically said, Joe Biden, China's puppet, mentioning that Biden's son Hunter received over $1 billion from a Chinese-owned government state-owned, Chinese government state-owned bank. There you go. They mention Joe Biden wanted to give China most favored nation status to normalize trade relations. Now, you can argue, whether Joe Biden is better or worse, fine. The point I'm bringing up is the propaganda is flying off the walls the day after we saw the documents being burned. Here's one. Trump blasts Beijing in public, but privately, Trump org imports tons of Chinese goods. Yeah, a lot of the stuff we make is made in China, and Trump is trying to do away with it. Sorry, still not convinced. The bigger concern I have is over whether or not things are going to escalate into a hot war. That's the conversation we've been seeing. The Cold War between the U.S. and China, things are certainly getting worse than they've ever been. The propaganda, however, man, this one. The New York Times says, opinion piece. My relatives in Wuhan survived. My uncle in New York did not. My father, a Chinese pulmonologist, believes his brother could have been saved. Okay, it'd probably be fair to read you through the entire thing. I'm not going to do that because I do want to talk about, the Cold War and the potential for war. That's what's really scary. But this propaganda, to this extreme, I think, must be addressed. My relatives in Wuhan survived, and I believe the reason they did, with all due respect to your family, is because China is an authoritarian dictatorship. They were welding people into their homes. They were detaining people by force, barricading their homes shut. Videos were emerging of people walking into houses finding people who had died. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. We may have problems in New York, but you got to balance freedom and security. Now, to be fair, I am torn between agreeing with the man and saying perhaps the reason your uncle didn't make it is because of Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio specifically. But no, sorry, man. Look, I understand that Cuomo and de Blasio made serious errors, and Cuomo's responsible for a lot of the death in the nursing homes. But you're not going to see me praising China, especially not with what's going on over the Uyghur Muslims and with what's going on in Hong Kong. You know, they're basically going after, they're going to suspend the rights of these individuals. Well, here's the bigger conversation. The United States and China enter a new Cold War, from John Kemp. The abrupt closure of China's consulate in Houston marks the latest incident in a rapidly escalating conflict between China and the United States. I gotta mention, this is a really amazing photograph. You see two flags, China and the U.S., and in focus behind it is the sickle and hammer. Very interesting. Future historians will probably focus on 2020 as the point when intensifying strategic competition between the U.S. and China turned into a new Cold War. The two superpowers are now engaged in conflict across multiple geographic theaters. South Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and multiple vectors: trade, investment, technology, espionage, institutions, health policy, naval, air power, missiles, and territorial disputes. The superpowers have articulated a lengthening list of grievances and almost no significant interests in common. Both are attempting to push third countries into an alliance system that would see the world carved into two decoupled blocks, red versus blue, with us or against us. Total confrontation, basically the definition of Cold War. Some policymakers and strategic studies analysts still hesitate to employ the Cold War concept, wary of the analogy between the decades-long U.S. and USSR conflict and its implications for international relations in the medium and long term. But there is no doubt both countries increasingly see and describe the conflict in existential terms. If it looks like a Cold War and sounds like a Cold War, it probably is a Cold War, and the concept illuminates more than it hides. But how close are we to major hot conflict? I don't know. A hot war is when people start firing bullets. We've already had the elephant walk in Guam, the strike group from China coming out in South China Sea. Many people have said to me, Tim, China is but a paper tiger. They could not actively stand up against the U.S. Fortunately for them, they may not have to. You see, the U.S. is facing a crisis of its own. We are tearing each other apart from the inside while a greater threat is growing and brewing. And maybe that's the real strategy. You know, you don't have to actually win the fight if you can manipulate and control those who you would have to fight. Perhaps China realized this. Joe Biden himself said he believes that Russia and China would, I believe, are interfering in our election process. So what do? We're too busy fighting ourselves. Progressives apparently want Joe Biden to tone things down on China. Sure, we can call them out. But that's some of the reporting coming out of Vox. I don't think we can stand for that. And I don't trust Joe Biden. If he's going to fly his son out to China for some equity deal, why would I pick him to be the one to challenge China? I tweeted something. It's very speculative. I wonder if the reason we are in this dramatic turmoil in our own country is because there are financial interests in the U.S., billionaires, wealthy corporations that have financial ties to China. They're scared that if Trump wins and goes after China, they will lose a lot of money. I mean, look at the NBA, for instance. They won't even call out the crisis with the Uyghur Muslims. I don't see them talking about it, let alone Hong Kong. So where do they put their money? Into politicians who oppose Trump, because they know how bad it really is. But do they really want to lose their power? It seems like some of these people would rather watch the U.S. burn, the markets crash, and people suffer, so long as their financial interests are secured. And that, to me, is actually scary. I'm not saying I know it's for sure why they're doing it, but I look to many of these billionaires who refuse to call out China. And when they make financial contributions and support politicians, I'm sure it's a factor. Just my opinion. I do believe that what Mike Pompeo is doing right now in Europe is one of the most important jobs being done. I hope he's successful, but I'm operating under the assumption that he's trying to get them to call out the crisis with Uyghur Muslims and Hong Kong. I certainly hope so. I have no problem with China becoming a very powerful country and an economic superpower. That's all fine. Good for them, so long as they aren't an oppressive authoritarian state. And unfortunately, they are. The China century. That's what they say. That's what Marsha Blackburn is saying. Well, I'll tell you what. They say that China plans hundreds of years in advance. And we're too busy, I believe this was Bill Barr who said it, thinking in terms of quarterly returns. What does that mean for us? I don't know. Get woke, go broke. We'll chase after the fad and the trend of the day to make as much as we can in the immediate. And then in 10, 20 years, there's nothing left. The country completely extracted a withered husk. Meanwhile, China, which is literally putting people in concentration camps, will grow. And they'll do it to more and more people. The U.S. has a difficult history, no doubt. But we've done better. There's no way the U.S. would get away with what China is doing today. Yet for some reason, these insurgent far-left groups that are attacking our institutions aren't calling out China. For some reason, climate change activists like Greta Thunberg aren't calling out China. Now, why is that? You tell me, but someone needs to do it. I'll tell you what, unfortunate for liberals in this country, it's Donald Trump. Yep, take it or leave it. If you're paying attention, you'd understand Joe Biden's he's not going to do a good job on this one. We'll see how things play out. The next segment is coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all there.